So everyone had their favorite commercial growing up, right? My personal one was the most interesting man in the world ad because of they had that attention-seeking line that drew your interest right away, and you were immediately encapsulated by seeing what the old dude was gonna do. And he was fun and it was great. And we don't have those type of commercials anymore. But what we do have are still the most interesting teams in college football every offseason. And going into 2024, there's a lot of good teams. But which are the most interesting programs? Let's go ahead and discuss that on today's show. But if you're new here, welcome on into the channel. My name is Cole Thompson, and I talk college football every single day. So if this is the type of content you enjoy, make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification. That way you don't miss a single episode of Just Saying It. And of course, hit subscribe because we're on the race to become the #1 YouTube show talking about our favorite sport. More importantly, we're on the race to become the #1 college football community. The best way to do so is by telling your friends, family, mortal enemies, best of bros, college football sickos that just enjoy conversations about their favorite sport, and anybody that just enjoys sports in general. Follow me on all the socials at Mr. Cole Thompson. It's the exact same as my YouTube handle. And if you want to continue this conversation and have a question read live on air or be a part of my Mailbag Mondays, email me, colethompsonwriting@gmail.com, or slide in the DMs on Twitter at Mr. Cole Thompson. Most interesting teams. This does not mean that you are going to win the college football playoff. It does not mean that you're going to be a roster that eventually finds their way to a conference championship. But you could be a team that does have a few things lean their way, and eventually that bodes well in your favor of maybe playing the spoiler role. Maybe it allows you to have a better record than we thought you would. This is really more so about what is the balance of college football. And there are some really good teams, really interesting teams to say the least. Iowa State, they immediately come to mind for me. Rocco Becht is back at quarterback, and it's kind of funny because of a lot of people had no idea what to expect with him. He balled out last year. If you weren't paying attention, he lived up to expectations as a true freshman, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and he's going to have another year to work with Matt Campbell. They still return most of their starting production. In fact, they're the most returning production in college football this year at 86%. They play in the Big 12, which automatically is a cluster mess. There's like 9 teams that all have a shot of making it to Arlington. And then you have like 2 sleeper teams and like a 3 more pack that you could see get above their win total of 6.5. So it's a giant mess of games. And Iowa State, a lot of people forget, they were a nobody for years. Like, name the last time that you actually thought about Iowa State as a football program. Probably never. And the years that you did, it was because Matt Campbell had everything going for them in terms of returning production. And that's kind of the case this year. Their matchups that they have are very daunting in terms of what the schedule looks like, but they got a lot of good games on home compared to on the road. Iowa's on the road, going to be a good matchup defensively, but offensively, you know what this is going to be. West Virginia and Kansas are the only 2 games that you really feel a lot worried about. Home games, Baylor, UCF, Texas Tech, Cincinnati, Kansas State. So there's a very good shot that if you're talking about Kansas State, maybe that's a team that right there is flirting with going to Arlington. Last week of the season, you pull off the upset, kind of like you did last year. And there you go. Lo and behold, now we're talking about this team actually making some noise and making some headlines. I don't know what Iowa State's going to be in 2024, but I know they have the right quarterback. I know they have the right coach. Don't be shocked if they're at least flirting with that 9-10 win total and maybe finding their way to Arlington. Another team that should find their way to Arlington, Oklahoma State. Something about having the right coach does wonders for a program. Even if you don't trust the quarterback, you have Alan Bowman, who's going into year 9 as a starter. He's been around longer than I've been alive, it feels like at this point. You have Ollie Gordon. You have arguably one of the best running back tandems in college football. A lot of people forget about that. It's not just Ollie Gordon. Like, yeah, he is going to be the difference maker and probably one of the best players in college football going into this year. But you also bring back Jaden Nixon. That's a really good complementary piece. You also still have other good quarterbacks. You also still have a pretty decent overall roster overhaul. You're third in returning production at 85%. And then you look at your schedule. This is going to be where it gets really interesting to me because they have some tough games. Arkansas week 2, South Dakota State week 1, but you also get Utah at home. You get West Virginia at home. You avoid Iowa State. You don't play any of the other top 3 teams in terms of the win totals. You get Kansas State on the road. That's going to be a tough matchup. And you get Colorado and Texas Tech to close out the year. As much as it pains me to say that I don't entirely believe Oklahoma State is going to be the next premier program in the Big 12, it's hard to bet against them this year. And if you've ever been to Boone Pickens Stadium, it is a fantastic atmosphere on college football game days. The thing about Boone Pickens is you talk to players around the NFL, and every single time I go to a locker room, I ask them, what's the most hostile environment that they'll play in? And 9 times out of 10, you'll hear that because of the sticks that rattle off on the sidelines, because of the way the fans, it's so dense internally, it ruptures your eardrums. You can't hear the plays go off on the field. It is an emphatic fan base. Like, they're not just the second fiddle to Oklahoma. People want to treat it that way, but it's nowhere near that if you actually talk to those around the block. They've been into Stillwater. They've watched this team and how they've encapsulated themselves. And again, it's Mike Gundy. He's going to get to at least 9 wins every single year. You know that. It's like kind of wash, rinse, repeat at this point. Kentucky is a really interesting team to me because every few years, Kentucky is one of those programs that just goes off on a run. Like, they get to 10 wins and they find their way into the top 25 ranking and they feel like that they're right there on the cusp of potentially being in the conversation of a legit threat. And then they go back to 7-6, and then they go back to 8-4, and then they go back to 6-6. And so that's Kentucky. They upgrade a quarterback, in my opinion. Brock Vandagriff, there is a scenario where last season, he actually beats out Carson Beck. And maybe we're talking about Carson Beck transferring schools and Brock Vandagriff being the actual long-term answer at Georgia. They bring in a good running back and Chip Trayanum. They still have very good wide receiver play, including bringing in Jamori Macklin. The other thing, Jamon Dumas-Johnson's coming on over defensively. And to me, when you get a leader like that who has multiple years of starting experience in the SEC, but on top of that, you're also getting a guy that probably has a shot to be an All-American from the get-go, there's a reason to believe that maybe Kentucky is going to have at least a little bit more success than we once thought. Their schedule ends on a very promising note, in my opinion. Tennessee, Murray State, Texas, Louisville. They should be favored in at least 2 of those matchups, if not 3. Auburn and Florida as well on the schedule. I feel like that they should be able to beat both of those teams. So we're talking about at the start of the year, can you get past Georgia and Ole Miss? Can you end the month of September at 3-2? Because if you can do that, I feel like that there's an opportunity to where Kentucky maybe goes 9-3, maybe they go 8-4, maybe they play the spoiler role. And then we're talking about like early November, and now they're going up against, say, Texas, and Texas has a bad showcase. Well, maybe that's a game that you feel more comfortable about Kentucky, to where, yeah, they're not going to be a playoff team, but they're damn sure making sure somebody doesn't go to the playoff in 2024. NC State. I've already talked about NC State a lot. They are the premier 2 team in the ACC. Like, if you think about where the ACC ranks, you see fluctuation between Miami and Florida State. UNC has a good year, and then they go 6-6. And then you talk about Syracuse and what they did for a few years underneath Dino, and then they fell apart. But NC State, every year, 3 things about them. 1, they're never going to fall below 500. 2, they're always going to have a good rushing attack. 3, they're always going to have a good defense. Premier Tier 2 team in college football. That's the way I view it. But this year, on top of having a good run game, on top of having an offense that I think is going to have another year to work underneath Robert and I's system, you kind of upgrade at quarterback with Grayson McCall. I think that he's a better fit for what's going to be run in Raleigh than what Brennan Armstrong was, which is weird because that was his offense coordinator at Virginia. They also bring in 2 other wide receivers or playmakers to pair alongside Casey Compacion with Justin Rogers, who, again, is an Ohio State wide receiver. So regardless of what his production says, what he learned at Columbus is why he's going to be, I think, a huge figure in the ACC. And they bring over Justin Jolly. And Justin Jolly is one of my favorite transfers in all of college football. He was great last season at UConn, led the team in receiving yards, led the team in receiving touchdowns. He also had, I think, the most targets on the roster. And he's going to be a really good flex tight end that comes on in and be a red zone target for Grayson McCall. Their schedule is a little bit more treacherous. That week 2 matchup is one of my favorite games in all of college football this year, because of when you think about non-conference matchups that are going to play weight when it comes to deciding who goes to the college football playoff, Tennessee and NC State need that win, because they may not be the favorites in their conference, but they could end up being a favorite in the SEC. I mean, they could be a favorite in a college football playoff scenario where that win carries a lot of weight. I like this team as a whole. They bring back a ton of returning production. On top of that, what they brought in the portal, I think should stabilize this roster. Dave Durant has been a really good coach for a long time. I feel like this might be the year where he finally gets over the hump. And I think Syracuse, listen, brand new coaching staff, but do you see their returning production? One of the best in the ACC. They have over 72% back, including most of their defense. They bring in Fran Brown, who's a great recruiter. We don't know what he is as a play caller, but what we do know is from a recruiting standpoint, he knows what he's looking for in terms of talent. He brought in a ton of names when he was at Georgia. On top of that, he also brings over Elijah Robinson. That is going to be a head coach in waiting very soon. He has been around the SEC for years on end. He was a major part of Texas A&M's development of their defensive line, which had been in the top 3 for years underneath Mike Elko, who's also back. They want to keep him down in College Station. They bring in Kyle McCord. And I don't know if McCord is going to be an elite quarterback in the ACC, but he is an upgrade. He is an upgrade over what you had. And I think that when you look at where he is in this progression, that might be enough to say, look, you feel pretty confident about where you are as a program going into year one. The other thing, their schedule is really, really relaxed compared to others. Ohio, Georgia Tech, Stanford, Holy Cross to begin the year. NC State on the road is a trap, but they close out the season with games against Boston College, Cal, and UConn, plus Pitt, who I still feel like is going through a rebuilding year. 8-4, 9-3, it's not off the table when it comes to Syracuse. They feel like a team that has so much returning production that maybe you compare them to like Missouri last year, where they felt like they had to make a few changes, but overall, you were very confident in the situation and the terms of where this team was headed. So I do like the situation about what Syracuse is. Not saying they're going to be a contender, but I am saying they are going to be a really good team moving forward. South Florida, if you look at what Alex Golesh is doing down in Tampa, you should be impressed. Like, their schedule is not going to be kind to them at all whatsoever, especially Alabama in week 2 and Miami in week 4. But still, Byron Brown, really good freshman year. Really good freshman year just for a quarterback in general. And they also have a defense that was able to hold their own. South Florida was a joke for a while. They didn't have anything going right for them after losing Charlie Strong. And so you look at this team, and the Bulls right now are probably going to be the 3rd or 4th favorite in the American Conference. But they are going to have a shot to have some of the best games of their schedule. They play Alabama. They play Miami. They brought in some good transfers. They also bring back 62% of their returning production, including their leading receiver, including their leading sack artist, including their leading tackler. They have a hard back end of the schedule. It does no favors. Todd Orlando is going to have to do a lot of work with this defense. But I feel like that there is an opportunity for this team from the get-go to be really prominent. And if that's the case, maybe, just maybe, we're talking about South Florida being one of those sleepers that makes it to the college football playoff. Wisconsin. The thing that I really like about this Wisconsin team, they know how to run the football. They've always had big bodies. They have a good coach in Luke Fickell that was always going to struggle in year one, making that jump in the transition. They also have a quarterback in Tyler Van Dyke that the last time he played in this style of offense, he was incredibly successful. There was a reason why many people were talking about him as a potential fringe first-round pick. He was garnering a lot of conversations for ACC Player of the Year. And Phil Longo loves to have a balanced air raid attack. Like, everyone thinks that the air raid has to be just pass. No, it just means that you're willing to extend plays deep downfield. They bring in Tyree Walker, the running back from Oklahoma. He was a really good pairing alongside Gavin Sawchuk, but now he gets to be his own entity. I think that plays extremely well in Wisconsin's favor. Their schedule is not going to be, I think, challenging, but there are some hot marquee games. The Alabama game in week 3, Camp Randall. That's going to be a huge dividend, and it's going to be rocking all over the place. I think Wisconsin feels like that team that is the spoiler this year. Let's go ahead and continue to build on what we have with Luke Fickell. Let's continue to work the transfer portal and adding in certain players. Let's continue to build a recruiting baseline throughout the Midwest. And then in year 3, we're going to take that next step. Like, it's almost at the same level as what Nebraska's doing right now, but instead you feel like that you have the veteran talent that can pave the way. To me, Wisconsin feels like that interesting team in terms of what they should be and what they can be. There's a middle ground. I think 8 wins is absolutely on the table. I absolutely also think that when you talk about where this team is going, they are trending upward. And lastly, West Virginia. We do not talk enough about West Virginia. I will be the first person to say on this channel, I am going to bring up West Virginia as much as possible. I hope that everyone follows me into the battlefield in Morgantown because of I love this Mountaineers team. Neil Brown, show up to Big 12 Media Days. Double burden everybody. Yeah, you thought we were going to be the joke of the Big 12. Screw you. We crushed it. 9 wins. Oh, and we return our starting quarterback. Oh, and we return our starting running back. Oh, and we have an over 60% of our defense back. Yeah, we're good. Do you guys know that they have one of the best offensive tackles in college football? Like, so many people forget, this is a good team. It's not a good team in terms of what is supposed to be West Virginia standard. No, it's a good team in general. How many of you know the name Wyatt Mullen? Well, he's going to be an All-American left tackle potentially this year, and if he's not, he's certainly an All-Big 12 tackle. You have C.J. Donaldson. Garrett Green's one of the most underappreciated quarterbacks in college football. This is a good roster. This is not a good team for the Big 12. This is a good roster. Their schedule does no one any favors, especially down the stretch. But don't tell me for 1 second that you look top to bottom at where this West Virginia team was a season ago. They live for the underdog mentality. They breathe being an underdog. They feel like a contender. They feel like a team that absolutely can take things into their own hands and build off of their success. I like what I've seen from West Virginia. I like what I've seen when they bring in the portal. Over 68% of their production is back. They're in a really good spot to, I think, build off of last season. Maybe they're not going to be a playoff team. Maybe they won't make it to Arlington. But nobody said that they can't. That's the key here, people. Just because if you think that you should doesn't mean you will. But just because if you're not the favorite doesn't mean you can't get there. Nobody thought TCU was going to go to the playoff. Guess what? They went to a national championship. You can't take that away from them. That's the same way I feel about West Virginia. Maybe not a national championship contending team, but they're going to spoil some shots for a lot of teams going to Arlington, and maybe they'll just find their way to AT&T Stadium in the process. Let me know in the comment section down below, who is the most interesting team in college football going into 2024? Like, rate, review, subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you continue to follow me on all the social media platforms at Mr. Cole Thompson. That way, conversations surrounding our favorite sport never have to stop flowing. Make sure also that you are telling your friends, family, mortal enemies, and best of bros about this channel, because at the end of the day, I would love to be the #1 college football community more than the #1 YouTube show talking about our favorite sport. But if I get to both, I'm actually not going to complain about it. So make sure that you continue to follow the channel and make sure that you continue to follow me on social. Until next time, folks, I am Cole Thompson. Later.